Hi everyone, my name is Nigel and we are continuing our study of Think Right. And today we're going to focus on a chapter which I think is very important. I think all the chapters are important, but a chapter that is quite crucial for people to start thinking about research, and that's chapter 7, What is a Problem? And this concept of problem will shape how you do an academic thesis, how you do an academic research paper, and even how you write an article in a journal. And I want to say that sometimes people don't use the concept of problem, but they use the concept of research questions. But you'll see that that's where I tend to push in this book, that the concept of problem is central. I believe that if we look at the concept of problem, then methodology and thesis, we will find a clearer way to help people understand how to negotiate higher theological education. Questions are good, research questions are good, primary questions are good. I'm not trying to dismiss them, but I feel that the concept of problem is critical for higher theological education. So I'll explain what I mean, and what we're going to do here is that I'm going to go through this chapter, What is a Problem, and just introduce you to the concept of the problem. And it's up to you to take it. You may say, I don't need it. Or you might say, hey, this is actually interesting. I never thought of the problem like that. So that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that you will look at this positively. And let's see where we go. So the question, chapter number 7, chapter 7, what is a problem? So like what we usually do, let's read the bold, where are we? The bold, every chapter has a introduction, and in an introduction there's one bold sentence. That bold sort of gives a quick either definition or quick introduction to that chapter itself. So this is what that sentence says. In an academic context, a problem is the central concern of a paper that requires correction, recovery, and or improvement. Now, how would you say that? I mean, even when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, if a student was to read this, they wouldn't even understand anything. Let me just say how we can say it. Generally, when we think of problems, we think of problems in society, or problems in our lives, or problems in our churches. But what we realize is that when we start moving to higher education, we have to look at a problem in academic terms. We have to see a problem not just in what is happening in society, but what is happening in academics. And so academics, which includes in books, in concepts, in theories, that's where we need to find problems. And that shift is a little bit difficult for some people who are used to just seeing the problems in society, and they're saying there are problems in society and I want my thesis to solve those problems or address those problems. But not all problems can be addressed through writing. Sometimes ideas can be addressed through writing, but problems are addressed through action, where we go out and try to address those problems. So why are we writing? Why are we spending time reading for several months and coming up with papers? What is the point of reading and writing to solve the problems in the world? So that is what we call academics, where we highlight certain ideas that are fundamentally shaping the problems in society. We highlight thinkings or ways of interpretation that the world is getting affected by, but it can be addressed through writing. It can be addressed through a discussion of text. That it won't solve all the problems of the world, but it could probably address a part of the problem facing the world. And that's what academics is, where we take part of the issues that are facing society and we address it academically. We try to address ideas, or we try to address the methods, the approaches people use to address real problems. Without getting into too much of the theory, let me just turn the page and go to page number 54. So in this book, and even in my teaching, I try to define this concept of problem in two ways. There are two categories of problems. And it's important for us to do these two categories because people tend to merge them in their work, and we need to keep them distinct. So the first category of a problem is a practical problem. A practical problem is a problem that emerges in the context, in society, in the world. So it could be a problem facing general society, it could be a problem facing the church, it could be the problem facing in me and my community, and these are the problems that we see day to day. But there is also another category of a problem, and that is research problems. Now, the research problem emerges out of books or articles, and they are problems of ideas or thinking or approaches. And this is a lot where higher education focuses on. How you are doing something, what are you saying, what are the ideas that are influencing your solutions. And when we find problems there, those are research problems. So what I find is many students merge the two. So when they say identify a problem, they'll say, oh, drug addiction amongst in my society, or they might say nobody's reading the Bible, or very few people are listening to sermons, or people are not coming to church. And these are all practical problems facing society or facing the church. But a paper, a thesis may not be able to adequately address that. So what we do is we address academic problems. And so that's where we call, or what we call research problems. And just to explain what a research problem is, I'll just give you, according to this book, I have highlighted 4 kind of research problems, and each kind has sub-kind. There are other kinds, but it will help you to know that there are many kinds of research problems, and when you're trying to address a research problem, it will help you to know what kind of research problem you are trying to address in your paper or in your thesis. So the 4 kinds of research problems are here. There's a textual research problem. So I'll just note it here, like over here, you'll see over here, it'll come up. The textual research problem. Then we have the conceptual research problem. Then we have the contextual research problem. And finally, we have a positively stated research problem, if that makes sense. A positive research problem. Okay, so these are the 4 problems, and I'll just show you, according to this book, what are these 4 kinds of problems. So let's go to the textual research problem. So the first kind of textual research problem is misrepresentation. It is where an author, let's say you're reading one book, and an author is misrepresenting another author. And they may be quoting, let's say, Martin Luther, or they may be quoting John Calvin in their work, but they misunderstand him or they misrepresent him. They show him as something that he is not. So your work can correct that. Your work can alter that reading. And so this is misrepresentation, where you find some ideas in a book and you find that needs to be corrected. So that's one. We see that in this book I've given example of in History of Christianity, where many times History of Christianity department will go to the past and see how history has been wrongly written, and they go back and correct that history because the way those people were represented was probably wrong. And so history is a recovery of voices that were hidden, or the voices that were suppressed, to give a bigger picture of what really happened in the past. So that's the misrepresentation problem. The second problem under textual problems is the misinterpretation problem. Here, very common for biblical studies is where people have misinterpreted a biblical text, and you're trying to correct that misinterpretation. You'll probably do your own translation, you'll probably do your own interpretation verse by verse and give a new meaning to a particular text that was misunderstood by either your church or by other scholars. And misinterpretation can also be of prior theologians or prior scholars or prior philosophers, where people are reading one philosopher, for instance, and they misinterpret him. And so, for instance, people think about Derrida, and they think that, oh, Derrida was believed that there is no truth. but that is a misinterpretation of Derrida. Derrida never said there is no truth. What Derrida was implying was that there may not be a way to know that you know truth with certainty. You may claim that you know truth, but we cannot know for certain that you know that truth. That is not something that we can know. So it's the knowability, the certainty principle is what was being doubted, rather than truth itself. So that's just an example of misinterpretation, where some people misinterpret a scholar, but then you correct that misinterpretation in your thesis. So we are looking at 4 different kind of research problems. The first one was textual, and there was the misrepresentation, and there was the misinterpretation. Okay, so this is just to give you ideas that when you're doing your thesis proposal, or when you're starting to do your academic writing, you'll get a sense of what is out there. You'll get a sense of the options in front of you, and you can choose what kind of paper you want to write. Second, there's the conceptual research problem. This is a little more advanced, where there are 2 kinds of conceptual research problems. One is ideological, which means that the author has a certain ideology that you, as the writer, do not agree with and you want to correct. So in biblical studies, I gave an example over here. In biblical studies, sometimes some people who come from the evangelical thinking, like me, I would call myself, like some evangelicals tend to overemphasize spirituality, and they emphasize life after death and the spiritual world. But they tend to, some people, not everyone, they tend to forget this world, the material world, the struggles of this world. So when you have an evangelical interpretation of the Bible, sometimes they miss what is happening in the Bible because of their ideology, because of their evangelical ideology. And you can recover that through post-colonial readings, and recognize that authors like Luke and Paul and John were not just talking about spiritual things, but were actually making political statements against the Roman government. In a very subtle way, they represented a critique of the empire. Now I'm just giving you an example of how one scholar can critique other readings of the text because of their one scholar can critique the ideological readings of others. And that's just to give you an example. There's another example where I really like one Indian theologian called Chinchaya, but Chinchaya was a convert from, was a Hindu Brahmin convert. He became a Christian after being a Brahmin. And so a lot of his thinking was influenced by Brahminical thinking. And as a result, the Dalit Christians feel that he is irrelevant for them because he speaks about Brahminical concerns, about ideological Hinduism or philosophical Hinduism. But the real concerns of the people were not addressed by Chinchaya. So you critique Chinchaya's Brahminical ideology and try to recover it through an alternative reading. Okay, so that's another problem that you can identify in your work. These are academic problems. Again, under the conceptual research problem, there is the methodological problem. Here we mean that how you're doing something is wrong. So the approach that you're taking. So let's say you're reading an author, and this author says that we need to look at the source Q when we are interpreting Luke and Matthew. So Matthew and Luke were influenced by Mark, but they were also influenced by another author called Q. And you could say, that is the wrong methodology to interpret Matthew and Luke. We should not be looking for Q. We just look at the text, and if we just do narrative readings of the text, we don't need to look at unnecessary hidden documents to interpret what Matthew or Luke are saying. See, so that's a methodology. Somebody proposes a methodology and you counter it by presenting your own methodology. So the methodological problem is there's one method that is wrong and you're providing a corrective method. Okay, so that is under the conceptual research problems. So that's the second type of research problem. The third type of research problem, or the third kind of research problem, is the contextual research problem. Here we have, again, there are three kinds of, I'm sorry, this first kind, second kind, third kind, okay. In the contextual research problem, the one is where there is confusion in academia. The context is academia itself. So you will find 3 or 4 definitions of a word, and then you'll say, look, academicians are not clear about what this word means, and I want to clarify what it means. My doctoral work was on the concept of religion, and I showed that in academia there is no consensus on what the word religion means. Some people say the word does not exist, and some people say it is spirituality, some people say there is no such thing as religion, and so on and so forth. There's a whole range of definitions on the word religion, and my work was to clarify what that word means through my book, What is Religion? So the confusion in academia is a problem, and my work tries to address that problem. The other thing is, the other contextual problems are research gaps, which means in the world there's a lot of research that is still left to do, and many people may have done research on, let's say, Western issues, but Indian issues are not covered well. So we need to identify those research gaps and do research on that. So what are the gaps in your context? What are your gaps in your area? And try to address those gaps in your work. So the problem is a research gap. That means not much has been done in that area. Similarly, within research gaps, it could also be the problem of not addressing issues that need to be talked about. So like the women's issues, if you will see in the past, over 1900 years of scholarship, hardly any Christian scholar has made women's issues the center of their work. Most of the work in church history talks about God and the Bible, but the practical issues facing society, and especially the problems facing women, has not been addressed. Only recently have we seen work addressing women's issues. So the gap was addressing women, addressing the struggles facing women in society, and that was a gap, and which now people are trying to meet, people are trying to address. So that was the contextual problems, contextual research problems. And finally, the fourth kind of research problem is the positive problem. Now, I know it sounds confusing. How can a problem be positive? But again, we are talking about academic problems, which means why are you doing your work? So a positive problem means that then there are two types here of positive problems. The first one is you have found something in previous literature, but nobody knows about it. So you try to recover something good for today's society. I remember one student wanted to do his work on Augustine, Father Augustine from church history. And I asked him, why are you doing it? And he said, Augustine has so many good things to say to the church today, and we need to recover his voice for today's generation. That's the idea, that you recover something what you believe is positive for today's generation. So that idea of recovering unknown perspectives. Similarly, you could also have found something that you want to build on. That's the other kind of positive problem, where somebody recently may have done a work, and you could say, hey, I really like this work, but I want to extend it in my work. So I'm testing their thesis, or I'm taking their thesis and building on it. So it's positive. I'm not trying to find a problem in somebody else, but the problem is that his or her work was not fully developed. Like, it was really good, but for my context, I want to take it. So I want to extend what they're saying for my context. So I'm just thinking of an example. Like some people do that with their own work, where they say that, oh, in my MTH, I did this research, and I want to extend that research in my PhD. So that's one way of extending previous research, but you could do the same with other people's work. Somebody's work is really good, and I want to build on that for my research. And that's actually a very positive cooperative understanding of academics, where we work together. So just to summarize, we have two categories of problems. We have the practical problems, the problems facing society, and we have the research problems, the problems in books, articles, ideas, methods. And these research problems, there are 4 types of research problems, each with their own subtypes. So the first type of research problem is textual, where we saw misrepresentation or misinterpretation. Then the second type of research problem is conceptual in terms of how people are thinking, and it has to do with ideology. You could have an ideological problem or a methodological problem. And then the third type of research problem is the contextual research problem, the problems facing the context, and one sub of that is the confusion in academia, the other is research gaps, and one is topical gaps where certain topics are not addressed. And finally, there is the positive problem where you find something in the past that has been hidden or unknown and you recover it, or there is a desire to extend somebody's work for your context or for your argument. So I hope this survey of problem will help you to understand what is your problem. Now, I don't mean what is your problem in life, because that's a practical problem, but I mean what is your academic problem in your thesis. And the more we start thinking about these different types of problems, we can start making decisions on what clearly is your problem. Now, I do want to say that you shouldn't address all these problems. You should address one problem in your work. Your paper or even your MTH thesis or your PhD should address only one problem. Don't address everything. So what is that main problem that you're trying to address? But here is an option, like a buffet. Now you can take which problem you want to address for yourself. But you can only take one, not everything. Which one would you take for your own work? So I hope that clarifies a bit about what a problem is. If you need more clarification, of course, the book is there for you. I do hope that you will recognize that the problem is an important part of academic thinking. And I hope that as you become more comfortable in starting to identify problems in research, you will be able to apply it more clearly in your writing as well. So all the best as you find academic problems. So anyway, bye and see you in the next video.